Making a cameo appearance to introduce our speaker tonight is a Distinctive Voices Lecture alumni, Raphael Bras. Dr. Bras is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and he is the Distinguished Professor and Dean of the Henry Samueli School of Engineering at the University of California, Irvine. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bras.
Good evening, everybody. We're here for quite a thrill, I'm sure. I don't know if all of you share my excitement of being here. Certainly to me it's quite an honor to be able to introduce Edward Osborne Wilson, or E.O. Wilson, as he's normally known. E.O. Wilson is an entomologist, but he's also an ecologist, a biologist, a philosopher of science, a theologist. There's nothing that you can mention that he hasn't written about and written well about. He is a research professor emeritus at Harvard University, honorary curator in entomology at the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard. He's widely regarded as one of the world's most eminent naturalists and a leading advocate of global conservation. He's perhaps best known for his theories extending the precepts of natural selection, not just to the biological, but to the behavioral aspects of human populations, as well as his view in modern extinctions. He received his PhD in biology from Harvard in 1955, where he taught for 4 decades, and he's the author of 25 books. The most recent, which is The Superorganism, The Beauty, Elegance, and Strangeness of Insect Societies. He often speaks about the importance of biodiversity, a term that he, I believe, coined, and environmental conservation. In fact, he's known to have helped coin, as I said, the biodiversity and biophilia concepts. Dr. Wilson is the recipient of more than 100 awards from around the world. They include the National Medal of Science, 2 Pulitzer Prizes for nonfiction writing, the Crawford Prize of the Royal Swedish Academy of Science, which is like the Nobel Prize of some of the fields of sciences that do not have a Nobel. He was elected to the National Academy of Sciences in the United States in 1969. In 1995, Time magazine recognized E.O. Wilson as one of the most influential living Americans. In 2000, Time magazine and the Osborne magazine named him one of the 20th century's 100 leading environmentalists. Foreign Policy magazine in 2005 called him one of the world's leading intellectuals. In 2006, Dr. Wilson was the recipient of the TED Prize, that's Technology, Entertainment, and Design Prize, where he introduced the concept of the Encyclopedia of Life, a contemporary, dynamic web page for every named species. The title of his lecture this evening is Evolution and the Future of the Earth. Please join me in giving him a very warm welcome, the father of biodiversity, E.O. Wilson.
Dean Bras, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to come here to the Western branch of the National Academy and talk to an audience of the quality I know can be drawn from this part of the United States. I'll start with the first slide. There he is. Charles Darwin, November 24th. 150 years ago, The Origin, the greatest book ever published, was by the pen of the greatest man who ever lived. Now, if that's not provocative enough, I'll try to find some other things from my presentation that will keep the temperature up. The 21st century, to come to the subject of my talk this evening, I think it's going to be known as the century of the environment. And in science, it's going to be known as a century of biology. This is the time that we're either going to settle down as a species or completely wreck the planet. It's a time when we will either evolve a better world order than we have now or not. I call what we have now our Star Wars civilization, after the Star Wars movie series. That is to say, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, and that's a weird and dangerous combination. I think the world's beginning to turn green, at least a pastel green, but I'd like to call your attention to an imbalance in the way we're turning green, as illustrated by the ongoing conferences in Copenhagen. The emphasis today is on the physical environment, that is, on climate change and pollution, decline of fresh water, Dr. Bross does feel, and arable land and the depletion of irreplaceable natural resources. And that's well and good, of course, that we should now focus on these matters seriously. But there is a proportionately much less attention on the living environment. And especially the diversity of life, biodiversity, biological diversity for short, defined as the totality of ecosystems such as those defined here from this Australian example, from varieties of common habitats that compose the ecosystem. And then next down in middle and small size in those middle and lower parts, the organisms that make up the ecosystems. And then, not shown, the genes that prescribe the parts of the species that compose of each of these ecosystems in turn. That great resource has taken billions of years to evolve. Our lives depend upon it because we are above all things, first and all, a biological species living in a biological world. And that is a plain fact which the vast majority of people in the world have not yet grasped. That leads me to what I modestly call Wilson's Law. It's actually appeared in the New York Times, New Scientist, and elsewhere, so it's sort of getting getting established, even though I didn't bother and I hadn't gotten around to writing any of the mathematical equations usually expected of a serious presentation. Wilson's Law says that if you save the living environment, you'll automatically save the physical environment, because you cannot save the living environment unless you save intact the physical environment that we have inherited. But if you save only the physical environment, you will ultimately lose them both. Our relation to the rest of life can be put in a nutshell as follows. Scientists have found the biosphere, that razor-thin membrane of organisms plastered onto the Earth's surface, to be richer in diversity than ever before conceived. We have now the technology and the greater effort to collect material from around the world, and it's more there than we thought. But at the same time, that biodiversity, which took 3.5 billion years to accumulate, is being eroded at an accelerating rate by human activity. The loss is going to inflict a heavy price on us and future generations in wealth, in security, and in spirit. The immediate future is usefully conceived as a bottleneck of still rapid population growth and high per capita consumption, even though population growth does seem to be headed toward a peak. By the end of the century, perhaps in the vicinity of 10 billion, it's still 40% more than we have now. Science and technology combined with a lack of self-understanding and a Paleolithic obstinacy. I will name no particular political party because that's inappropriate at a place like the Beckman Center. That led to our ruinous environmental practices now has to pull us back out of our predicament. The radical reduction of the world's biodiversity ongoing is a folly our descendants will least likely forgive us. So let me now review some of the basic and rather amazing facts about biological diversity. First of all, how much is there? When I put that together 20 years ago, those figures, we knew about 1.4 million species had been described and given a scientific name, although we've never had an accurate count of just how many have been described. We think it's in the vicinity of 1.9 million now. And here you have plain to see the distribution of species that are known. It hasn't changed an awful lot. We live in the Cenozoic, which is dominated by insects, as in fact the terrestrial ecosystems have been among the lower smaller organisms since the Paleozoic times, and now by the flowering plants, and the insects and the flowering plants are in intimate symbiosis with each other. They are the partners in maintaining the land environments on which our lives depend. Here is this in a speciescape, where the number of known species is represented by the size of a representative organism. So here the insects are represented by this beetle looming like a great blimp, a Goodyear blimp, over a tiny elephant there, which is the 5,000 or so known mammal species, hiding beneath the gigantic mushrooms. And you can look around and see enormous diversity, unexpected, that is, most people would not expect it to be there, that is existing, including the arachnoids represented by this mite in the lower left-hand corner. Now, I want to give you an idea of why we call this a little-known planet. Approximately 60,000 species of fungi are known. Well, I'm not into fungi now, but we'll get to them shortly. 60,000 species of fungi are known. Mushrooms, rust, symbionts of lichens, and so on. And the estimated number by experts exceeds 1.5 million. In other words, we've scarcely begun to explore the fungi of the world. And then there are these little creatures here. These are the nematodes, or the roundworms. The number of species may be somewhere in the vicinity of 16 or 17,000 species, and they occur in immense variety. And the vast majority of them are free living. They're not parasites. That's what most people think about as roundworms being parasites. Only a tiny minority are. Maybe 16,000. They are so abundant, these roundworms. They're the most abundant animals on Earth, that it's said they make up 4/5 of all the animals on Earth, roundworms. That it's been said that if you took away all of the solid matter off the surface of the Earth, except for roundworms, you could still see the ghostly outline of most of it in the Earth, in the roundworms. The number of species may be in the millions. And let me immediately say to young people who want a great career where every research effort turns to gold and is extremely important to the future of humanity, first of all, consider becoming a mycologist, an expert on fungi. We desperately need you. Don't be afraid to study biodiversity. You don't have to definitely take one species and start working on cellular, molecular structures and process. Find out about all of the fungi of the world. Become the world expert on lots of them. You can do that at a fairly early age and make a great career of value to humanity. But if they don't appeal to you, I know it's a little tougher, but become a nematologist. That's an expert on nematodes. Good Lord, you don't have to go 10 feet out the front door of the Beckman Center and you'd be into the middle of nematodes that could occupy your studies the rest of your life. So think progressively. But here is the dark matter of life on Earth, the bacteria. There are, I can give one number known. 10 years ago, the number was of known species about 5,000. It's certainly double that by this time because with rapid DNA sequencing, we've now opened the bacterial world. How many species are there? No one knows to the nearest order of magnitude. In one pinch of soil that you hold between thumb and forefinger, could be, say, 1 gram, 1 million bacteria representing 5,000 to 6,000 species of bacteria, virtually all of them unknown. 1 ton of fertile soil estimated to have 3 million bacteria in them. Consider that each one is exquisitely adapted to a particular microenvironment. Many are latent, waiting for the right combinations of heat, nutrients, and perhaps moisture. And they come to life. And they are the substance of the world that's beyond our view, and almost nothing is known of them. We have scarcely begun to explore the world of microorganisms, the bacteria, and then there are, of course, the extremophiles, particularly those in the archaea, which are this distinct group of microorganisms that look like bacteria. And if I have any advice to give young people, did I say that before? If nematodes and fungi aren't your thing, good heavens, get into this. You carry undescribed species on your shoes. There are now, by count, more than 500 species of bacteria that inhabit the human mouth and esophagus. More are being discovered all the time. They are probably symbionts, that is, they are among the huge mass of bacteria we carry in our bodies that are necessary for our health. We don't know what most of them are doing. There's a good chance they're protecting us from pathogenic bacteria. There are, about on the order of a trillion human cells, but we're carrying around on the order of about 10 trillion bacteria with us. We're taking care of them. They're taking care of us. Incidentally, just for an image, most people can't conceive of what size is involved here. And here is a way to think of it. If a human cell is the size of a small city, a bacterium is the size of a football field, and a virus is the size of a football, which brings me to the viruses. Now, if bacteria don't bother your mind and invite you into an instant career of great success, I will say to young scientists, consider viruses. Here, we just scarcely know what anything is happening. I mean, in terms of the total diversity, we know that probably the genes that program the viruses of the world are twice as diverse as all the genes that program all the other organisms combined. And they're not just the creatures, semi-organisms that cause swine flu and things like that. They're vast arrays of semi-organism, I would call that, include the prophages, the so-called gene weavers, which in manners that we do not fully understand help bacteria through periods of rapid evolution. Here, then, we come to the foundation, and that is the diversity of the genetic code. This is a small virus. This is 1,000 nucleotide pair code, and this is this panel. You can actually see the human DNA there. Little squiggly molecules actually see them. And if we were to put up 2,500 similar panels, you could include all of the DNA of a human cell. And humans aren't that peculiar. I mean, we're not that loaded with DNA information. In fact, we have a relatively modest amount of DNA. And yet, if you would take all of the 4 strands of DNA from a human cell, one nucleus, and unfold it, and spread it out, so of course you have the double helix, but you've taken out all those little knots and triple folds and so on, the ones that double up like, your telephone cord, if you haven't gotten around to getting a detangler, then you spread it out. The actual molecule, physical molecule, would be approximately 1 meter. Incredible. But you wouldn't see it because it's about the helix is about 2 nanometers, 2 billionths of a meter across. Now, if you were to magnify that molecule until you could see it clearly, say it was the width of a piece of wrapping string, then how big would it be? You would have, would it go out of the room? Would it be enough to go out of this room? Oh, yeah. Would it be enough to go out of Irvine and the vicinity? Oh, yeah, it would go on and on. It would go approximately 1,820 miles. That's the distance between New York and Dallas. And as you walked along it, this piece of wrapping string reading off the code, you would be reading off about 100 on the order of 100 base pairs an inch. And that's what we lose when we lose a species, is that amount of information. Encyclopedic, far more detailed, far more adapted to particular environments and conditions, far more loaded with potential biotechnology and medical innovative products for innovation than you can dream of. That's what we lose when we lose one species. Where is biodiversity located? Well, wherever there's liquid water or the potential of liquid water, pole to pole, from the summit of Mount Everest to the Challenger Deep, 36,000 feet below the ocean's surface. At the very least, there are bacteria and other microorganisms, especially microscopic fungi. And some of them, particularly archaeans, are the extremophiles, living, for example, in water above the boiling point in the smoker volcanic outlets of the deep sea. And there is one species there which is adapted to temperatures above boiling water. So if you cool it off to boiling water, then it can live, but it can't reproduce. You've chilled it out. There are bacteria adapted to mine outflows with pHs about as low as carbolic acid. And then there are the slimes. That's an acronym. Slimes. That means subterranean lithoautotrophic microbial ecosystems. And these are the organisms which you encounter when you start going below the surface of the ground, and they continue on at least for 2 kilometers down, and they are completely independent of the surface. They haven't been known long, and they are just beginning to be discovered. I mean, we're so busy studying microbial life on the surface, we haven't gotten to this huge mass of life down below, which is different from what's on the surface. And it is independent because it lives on inorganic chemical energy. It is not dependent ultimately on sunlight, but there's a world all of its own. And the biomass may be greater of that huge assemblage, mostly of bacteria, well, I guess entirely of bacteria so far as we know, and microscopic fungi. If we burned off the surface of the earth, completely turn it into a crisp, they might continue on. And that is why I think exobiologists, planetary biologists, what are we calling them, should have some hope about Mars, because there is a liquid layer if you go deep enough, and that represents what has retreated below Mars following the aqueous period. And that's where we should be looking for life. Perhaps looking for it in some of the areas where the cracks have occurred and some recent outflows have occurred, but if we find life on Mars, that will be it. And further, we may find life like that. Who knows what it would be like, but it would probably be microbial. In the great water spumes being thrown out by the volcanic fissures of Enceladus, the moon of Saturn. And if we can't find it there, maybe we ought to drill on down through the great ice crusts of Europa, the moon of Jupiter, where life might have evolved over billions of years in the deep ocean there. But I'm beginning to lose myself. Let's come back to Earth, where we want to save what's on this little-known planet. The tragedy unfolding is our ignorance of that human action is destroying countless species, our lack of appreciation of this. And even ecosystems before we knew they existed, many of these that we are destroying month by month are millions of years old. Now, let me give you a little bit of good news, that is in terms of science and technology. Recently, a consortium, in the last couple of years, of key organizations, including the Smithsonian Institution, Harvard University Field Museum of Chicago, Global Biodiversity Information Facility in Copenhagen, Marine Biological Station, and now increasingly others, have gotten together and with a substantial grant, feeder grant from the MacArthur Foundation, have put in full operation the Encyclopedia of Life, which is an electronic encyclopedia that has an indefinitely expandable page for every species on Earth. Eventually we'll cover them all, and everything known about that species to be on it as we accumulate and put in information in. It's now at the 100,000 species level in place, and we hope to have it at the million level in several years. It's an open source. It has single access on the web on command. Its address, and I recommend you take a peek at it, is EOL.org. That's encyclopediaoflife.org. Each species is being and will be multiplied with multiple views of the type or other authenticated specimens, so that you don't need to go to a museum, even if you're a scientist, in many cases, to work out details of what distinguishes that species. There will be the genome. There will be probably by linkage, and there will be a diagnosis, and then there will be all that information about it. I'm proud to have had a role in this, and I think this is a large part of the future of biology. It provides a stimulus to map in detail the status of every species, ultimately its distribution, and then of course its status in terms of whether it's likely to survive, and then of course its possible uses for humanity, which are vast. We haven't begun to explore the uses of more than a minute fraction that's use to us, of importance to us in biotechnology, in maintaining an environment the way it has to be maintained. We've scarcely begun to study it. Now, and as already in this particular enterprise, a great deal of interest already being shown by the biomedical and informatic industries, And we expect substantial more as the encyclopedia takes on a life of its own in proportion to the services it provides. Simultaneously, and this in a way is even more astonishing because we are now, ladies and gentlemen, in the digital age, is the Biodiversity Heritage Foundation, which was founded at the same time as the Encyclopedia of Life. And that is launched by libraries, has been launched by them with deep stores of literature on biodiversity and related topics. Its goal is to scan all of the literature on biodiversity back through time for a total of what its engineers estimate will be 500 million pages. They are past the 10 million page level now. And this has been made possible, of course, by advances in technology, and all within the last 10 years. And eventually, well, not too long into the future, you will be able to know wherever you are. The upper Amazon, a schoolhouse in Angola, call up everything known virtually about biodiversity. You can make field guides from it for local use. You can teach with it. You can conduct research without ever having to leave from where you are, and this will have a revolutionary effect on biology. The implications for biology and the environment are enormous by this initiative. It means that research on Earth's ecosystems and species is being accelerated, and that any information on ecosystem or species can be pulled up immediately. Now, let me turn to the status of biodiversity. And here we have where most of the species occur. These are the tropical forests, moist forests, the rainforest, in black, covering roughly 6% of the Earth's surface, diminishing quickly, down half already from what it was before humanity came along. And serious research on the immense life within it is proceeding rapidly. Much of the interest is in the canopy where the bulk of the photosynthesis occurred, where a large amount of the biodiversity is found, and it's been mostly unexplored because it's so hard to get up there. Because some of these trees, this is a big forest of Borneo, have boles that go straight up like this, often with spines or slick surface before they branch right near the top in the canopy. And when you get up there, as you can see on that branch that sticks out to the left, covered by dense epiphytes, many of which are sawtoothed, like bromeliads, and cacti live up there, species of cacti and orchids and so on. And it's swarming with stinging wasps and ants. Tarzan would not have lasted 15 minutes. Young scientists are going up now, though. We have launched a full exploration of the forest canopy, and that whole era of research has begun. And this is one of the graduate students at Harvard who devised early on a technique of getting up there with using rope climbing technique, shooting a lead line up with an arrow and pulling the rope up and then climbing up and down. And if that looks dangerous, well, that's what graduate students are for. And I've told that a number of times, and I promise you I'll shut up first time I hear of a serious injury or worse. But I don't think we've had any yet, and we've been careful. And one of the reasons why we haven't had it, this is just lovely. This is a young lady on a huge tree in Panama, going out, climbing on out into an unknown world, doing research and making discoveries virtually every foot of the way as she wishes. When I was a graduate student, doing work in the tropical forest like this was macho. Only young men did this, went out. And I didn't think women could ever do it or would ever want to do it. Boy, was I wrong. I think more than 50% of the women in ecology today, of the students are women. And they're crawling all over the forest. I think I got my epiphany when a friend of mine, Mrs. Ned Carney, had a photograph of herself taken while she was rappelling up or climbing, whatever the technique is, to get into a high canopy like this, where she was doing pioneering work on epiphytes there, and she was going on up with her baby on her back. And I said, wow, okay. From this, and the diversity is astonishing, from this one tree I recovered more species of ants, 42 species of ants living in that one tree. That is, that's their home. And that's approximately equal to the number of all the ant species known from the British Isles in one tree. So that's the sort of richness that we are dealing with. And of course, there are been safer ways of doing it, and now the way of choice is using building cranes. You can now get in where we don't lower people like that hanging from it, but we use this is a prototype one in Panama. What to do is you go in a gondola, and you can be lowered up and down. You can be swung around. You can travel back and forth, and it's just an absolutely amazing experience. You can go where no one has ever gone before. These investigators are studying photosynthesis in some of the organisms right out on the tips of the leaves, 80 or 100 feet above the ground. No one had dreamed of ever getting out there like that, and much less leisurely conducting experiments and so on. Well, you don't have to go to the rainforest, though, to get into intense diversity, unknown, mostly unknown. This is a block of leaf litter, looks two-dimensional. This is in Germany. It's just what you would have around here, essentially, in appearance. It looks two-dimensional, but in fact it's three-dimensional. As, for example, this section made in Central Park, just to show that as you go down, you're passing through layers, almost millimeter by millimeter of different temperatures, nutrient conditions, pH, and so on. And at each layer, the conditions allow specialization of soil-dwelling organisms. I have an article coming out in the National Geographic, I think it's scheduled for February, which just accompanies magnificent photographs taken by David Lichtwager, one of the best photographers of things like this, who's gone around the world and dug up a cubic foot of soil in different parts of the world, all around the world, filtered out all the organisms and spread them out and taken photographs of them. And I think you're going to be amazed when you see what comes out of just a scoop of soil in different parts of the world, and find out that there's a world, an unexplored world, literally at your feet. If you get them out, this is 1 square foot from Panama, I think. Yeah. And this is why I say you can go to a rotting stump and study the succession of organisms over a period of years as one fauna of wood-decomposing, fungus-eating, spore-eating organisms after another, slowly reduce that back into soil. You could spend a lifetime of research, of productive research, in a Magellanic voyage around that one trunk, inch by inch, and do the kind of research we badly need done. And it's a lifetime occupation. This is myself at the age of 13 in the vacant lot in Mobile, Alabama, where I was doing a Boy Scout project to find out all the ants that live in the neighborhood of Mobile around there. We live 5 blocks from the yards, the shipyards, and I found the first colony discovered in America of the imported fire ant there. That was my first scientific discovery, and that went from where I found it. It had covered probably most of Mobile by that time. And has since spread from the Carolinas to Texas, leapt over to here. I think you've got fire ants here now, spreading north. I told the folks up at Berkeley, I said, they're coming. First you're going to hear a distant hissing sound, and then they'll be there. And they've leaped over to China and Australia, and they've worked their way down Florida, and they're over in the West Indies. They're filling up the West Indies. I mean, that's really something. I'm sort of proud of them in a perverse way. And that's the year and the spot where I found that first colony. And anyway, I never quit. That's me 50 years later in a square in San Jose, Costa Rica, taken by my friend Bert Holdobler, who was photographing me while I collected ants of the genus Phydolia in that park. I was wondering why he was taking so many photographs. And the reason was that a police car had quietly pulled up behind me. And in broken Spanish, I had to explain. And I think they let me go what I was doing, crawling on the ground like that. And I think mainly because they might have thought I was a little bit, that I was allowed to go on. It's all coming down in many parts of the world. The destruction is terrible. I don't need to tell you. This is what it looks like from space, and at night when it all pieced together to make it a cloudless sky. You can see, as you would expect, the brilliant lighting of the industrial area and the Gulf, the oil flares around the Persian Gulf and so on. But if you look, you can also see huge numbers of little dots across the Sahel of Africa down into the Congo and then across Brazil, right through the Amazon forest and Cerrado. And those are fires. People cut the forest and they burn it. And that's how they're pushing the agriculture. As the area of each of these major habitat types diminishes, I won't go into detail, but the extinction rate, so the ultimate extinction that will occur, is quite predictable. It's a species area curve. This is what you have in actual islands in the West Indies, going from big ones from Cuba on down to tiny ones like Saba and Redonda and the Lesser Antilles. And you can see it's a pretty neat progression down. And a way to remember it as a rule of thumb, one measurement, 90% loss of area of a habitat results ultimately in the loss of half the species become extinct. And that's true not only of actual islands, but of ones that we are making ourselves by cutting away, well, first of all, habitat islands, but also we're making them, we're making formally continuous habitats with rich faunas and floras into islands, little archipelagos, and we're watching the extinction occur. To give you an idea of just how rapidly this can occur, is occurring, this is a story which is sadly, that I'm about to show you, is sadly typical of much of the world. The Philippine Islands, 100 years ago, a little more than 100 years ago, was mostly covered 70% with one of the richest, the most diverse, beautiful rainforests in the world. But cutting it down proceeded from this point on. And if you'll look at the area of the green as it disappears, and then look at the date, the year, and the percentage cover, I'll take you without commentary up to near the present time. Going, gone, not quite gone. Finally, the Philippine government now is putting in better and better regulation, and enthusiastic conservation groups are beginning to develop in the Philippines, so we'll hold on to some of it. This is the same thing that happened, for example, in the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil, from the time that Darwin first saw it. That's the forest that Darwin said he was desperate to get into when he arrived in Rio. And the Portuguese customs people would not let the Beagle crew through. He couldn't get through. So he wrote in his diary, I would kiss the dust off their feet if they would let me get into that forest. And finally he got there, and could not stop in his diary exclaiming over the magnificence of that forest. It too is mostly gone. And the species that are disappearing, particularly horrific in the case of frogs, which appear to have suffered a pandemic of historic, then not appeared, they have suffered a pandemic of extinction as from the chytrid fungus that has spread worldwide, pandemic, and wiped out large numbers of species of frogs and continuing to do so. They're just very sensitive because the chytrid fungus lives on their skin. They breathe through their skin. They get an infection of the fungus and they suffocate. There are invasive species like the horrendous brown tree snake. You can see it swallowing a little bird. Got into Guam right after the Second World War, and the thing specializes on nestling birds. I mean, it's a terrific predator. Before we realized what was happening on Guam, every single land bird, not just every species, but every single individual was gone. It was eaten by these things. Then they started raiding chicken coops, and people started noticing the brown tree snake. Let's look at just a portrait now of the actual species on the brink of extinction and having gone extinct, because numbers and curves and so on don't have the impact of actually seeing the sorts of things that we're losing. This is the cerulean paradise flycatcher of the Philippines. We thought it was extinct, but a tiny population has been discovered now on one of the Palawan Islands, and we might be able to hold on to it, but it's touch and go. The orangutan is plummeting in numbers. On Borneo, where so much of the forest has been cut back to plant oil palms, the population has been cut in half and is still dropping. The ivory-billed woodpecker, gone. I don't care what you hear about rumors from time to time. Recently, I went up the river where the last sightings must have recently been reported. It's the Choctaw Hatchie in the panhandle of Florida. And I visited that area, and we now know that even that sighting was a mistake. The imperial woodpecker, bigger than the ivory bill, Mexico, gone. Last one eaten by a truck driver and his mother around 1860. He reported when he was asked, it was a great piece of meat. The golden toad of Australia, of Costa Rica, which used to teem in the thousands at Monteverde and a couple of other places, wiped out, gone. Chytrid fungus, almost certainly. The banded snails, tree snails of Hawaii, half of them gone. The remaining species remaining endangered, all of them gone from French Polynesia, Tahiti and elsewhere. The plants of Hawaii, like the hina, is holding on the big island in the volcanic rim. But lots and lots of plants in Hawaii are extinct. They've gone extinct. Or they're hanging on by as little as one specimen, being cared for by horticulturists desperately trying to find out ways to propagate it vegetatively. Hawaii is the extinction capital of the world. For example, Hawaii began with about 150 bird species, a magnificent bird fauna, with a Hawaiian eagle, huge goose-like birds that were sort of the equivalent of tortoises in their habits, flightless ibises, and then this great array of honey creepers, many, many species. All those birds are gone, except for half of, or a small number of the honey creepers, and all of them are endangered. From 150 roughly to perhaps 30 species. And the birds you see in Hawaii are from all around the world. And the plants that they're flitting on, one from one branch to the other, from all around the world. If you want to see original Hawaii, you have to climb the mountains and get cold and wet and lucky and you might see a genuine native Hawaiian bird. They're that close to full extinction. What to do about it? Well, the major conservation organizations are focusing on identifying what we call hotspots, like these that have been mapped around the world. These are areas, and there are areas within areas, small pieces of those areas, that we know more and more about, that are in greatest danger of being wiped out, that is the ecosystems. Like, the Cape Province of South Africa, that's one that's likely to go before too long as the climate warms, because, you see, it's adapted to cool conditions at the Cape, right at the Cape. And as that warms, it has no place to go. So that could be wiped out. But you look around and you can see where others are located. And we have to concentrate on those and put our best efforts globally on those. Of course, each country in turn, including the United States, has its own hotspots. And I'll just name several of them from America. Hawaii, of course. Puerto Rico, which is in better shape now because it is getting reforested. The plateau, the Lake Wales Highlands of Central Florida, that's an odd one. The Southern Appalachians, especially the aquatic stream faunas. And the Central Plateau of Texas with its underground streams and local flora are among America's hotspots. We have to focus on them and make sure that they at least are saved. Okay, so I'm going to conclude by reemphasizing that we live on a little-known planet. We are destroying a large part of that life without even knowing what we're doing. That is to our enormous advantage if we beef up biology now and let it spread laterally into biodiversity studies, and that we make a very high priority the saving of the living world, making it proportionate in urgency to the physical world that we've been focused on. And I hope that in this brief time I've been privileged to be with you in a very special group, that I've added to the conviction shared by growing numbers of thoughtful people in all walks of life, that this is a problem that we can solve. For example, it's been estimated that to save the key hotspots that I just illustrated, and then add to it core areas in the 3 remaining tropical forest wildernesses of the Amazon, the Congo, and New Guinea, and that would cover upwards of half the species of the world, give a little bit of cover to it for a while to hold on to it. That would cost one payment of approximately 1 part in 1,000 of the world domestic product, let's say in the order of $50 billion of the annual world domestic product. We're talking really about chump change here. And if we can't come up globally with that kind of money and put that kind of research into play and take what measures are needed to save life, then we will have committed an immense mistake. Well, at any rate, the resources to save it then, to learn about it and to save it, exist. And those that control those resources have every reason to achieve that goal, not least their and our own security and the future quality of life that the living world will bestow on us. The cost is not high. The benefits are beyond calculation. At the end of the day, however, the direction we take will be an ethical decision, It will have to have a kind of religious intensity. This is why I have not held back, for example, in my book, The Creation, from calling on the religious community, the evangelicals included, to join with the scientists in something that really is supernal. It's transcendent, above all of our differences and concerns, to come in. A civilization able to envision God, we say to them, and an afterlife. And even to talk seriously and sometimes about embarking on colonization of space, particularly after we've ruined this planet, is surely going to find the way to save the integrity of this magnificent planet and the life that's on it. Because, quite simply, it's the right thing to do. It's an ennobling task for our species. So I can do no better than closing with a statement attributed by the late John Sawhill, formerly president of the Nature Conservancy, and my friend. He said, a society is defined not only by what it creates, but by what it refuses to destroy. Thank you for having me here tonight.